I absolutely believe that the belt sander is the most underutilized tool in the entire shop. In this video, I'm going to show you a few pointers that'll help you get the most out of this vastly versatile machine. So a very common task for the belt sander for me is to get solid wood flush with a substrate. And it's very common to leave the solid wood slightly proud of the substrate, in this case Baltic birch, and then to get that down flush by means of a hand plane or a scraper, or my weapon of choice is a belt sander. So by adding a pencil line, I can really keep track of my progress. If I can still see the line, I know I'm not going through the veneer. So one of the key points of using a belt sander is to keep it moving. There's a big fear that you're going to burn right through, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. Beautiful, clean, nice and smooth. Let me show you more. So real quick, I want to talk about belt sander size. These are a 4x24. This is my favorite. This is the Makita 9401. And I hate to break it to you, but they don't make this anymore. You can, on occasion, find a used one, which I just found this one on eBay, or Craigslist is another good source, right? And the reason I like this particular belt sander is because it's a very low center of gravity. And then, of course, it just sands superbly flat, which is a point that I want to make with a 4x24. So 4-inch wide, 24-inch belt, and that big footprint helps keep things nice and stable when you're trying to sand something flat. Now, of course, if you're using a belt sander on edge, maybe do countertop work, maybe a 3x24 would be a better size. He means a 3x21. All right, let's talk about grit size. So I use a bunch of different sizes. I use 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 150, 180, and 320. Yeah, that's right. So my most common used sizes of grit, you don't have to buy all those, but each one has its specific place. If you're grinding something and you just don't want to be there all day with a 120 grit, put a 40 grit down on there and just grind it down quickly, right? So my two most used sizes are the 120 grit and the 180 grit. 120 for rough sanding, and then 180 is a finish grit for me. You may or may not have noticed these have arrows on them. They appear to be directional arrows, and they are. But let's look at the way this belt is made. There's a seam and it's going off at an angle. It's a butt joint, it's not an overlap. So some machines use an overlap seam or joint, and this paper, of course, is made in bulk. But when it comes to a belt sander like this, that direction does not matter. As a matter of fact, if you use it one way and then you flip it over, you'll notice it's cutting a little bit better. So check this out. Let's say this belt is on here, and you can see that the seam is running out at an angle from me downwards away from me. There's an arrow on here that means it's going in the right direction. Well, if I flip this backwards, now the arrows are wrong. Look at the seam. It's still the same, right? So direction, don't worry about that. You'll notice you'll get more use by using it than flipping it over. Also, notice how this is a little bit dirty. This is a cool little thing. This is an abrasive cleaner. You can find these probably Clean Spore, Amazon. Just Google that, abrasive cleaner stick, sometimes called an abrasive eraser. And you simply run the sander and just run this back and forth, and it'll clean up a lot of that junk that gets in there and give you a little bit more use from your belts, yeah? All right, let's see how this belt sander works in action. So they're all gonna work very similar. They have this tensioner. It's just a lever, release that. Boom, you can take the belt off, put a different belt on, flip the belt over, right? That guy goes on there. Just try to center it somewhat close on the wheels, and then run it. And you'll notice there's a tracking knob, and that's going to move the belt left and right. I shut the vacuum off. It's still going to be a little noisy, but let's see how this goes. Pretty simple. You just want that belt to track somewhere in the middle, right?
Here's a little bit of a close-up. And I need to mention that you really need to use a vacuum when you're using a belt sander. A tool actuated is best, but even a shop vac will do fine. The bags that come with these, they do okay. Actually, no, they really don't. Get a shop vac or tool actuated to fire up the vacuum when you pull the trigger on the belt sander. Those are ideal. All right, let's show some technique. A belt sander really excels on getting things flat for one primary reason. It has a platen. On this particular belt sander, that's about a 4-inch by 6-inch piece of metal that's dead flat with a belt going across it. It's going to get everything nice and flat, way better than a random orbital sander could do, and with the equivalent grit, way faster as well. Now, I love using a low angle raking light. This is going to show all your flaws, whether it's one veneer that's still higher than the other, or maybe a scratch or a little bit of a divot. This low casting light will create these long shadows and magnify and accentuate even the slightest discrepancies. From there, I can go on to finish sanding.
Check out what I found on eBay. So this is the Makita 4x24 9401 model. I love these. They have a very low center of gravity. So with this dude, I now have 4 of these. And anytime I find one of these, I go ahead and buy it because they are a rare breed. They don't make them anymore. They're hard to find. And the 9403, I believe, or the 9404 has replaced this. And they're okay, but I like this model better. And so, yeah, you can see this thing is used, very used. Nice long cord there, right? And first thing I do is, this whole thing will need cleaned up. I'll go through the whole thing, you know, lubricate the bushings and check everything. And this plate, it comes with this factory plate that has a piece of cork underneath. And these, I don't care for them. What happens is, well, you can see how that's warped. So these will warp from the heat, from the friction, and then they start to distort, and that'll show up in the work. In addition, if you set this thing down on a block of wood or something, it can dent that little plate, which is, yep, this one's dented, and then that dent causes a deformation that transfers into the work, and it'll telegraph and start leaving these little tracks in your work. So first thing I do is get rid of these. There's 4 factory screws there. Pull that off. This will all get cleaned up. And then I add some of this graphite. So this is a 4x24 graphite sander platen, right? And it's a PSA, public service announcement. Oh wait, no, that's pressure sensitive adhesive. And I'll actually form this front end down a little bit to start there and come around. And this makes a huge difference. And I save these screws because with this particular model, I can then make these curved platens. So you can see this is a 30-inch radius, and those screws will hold that dude on there. I have all these different radiuses, 23, 52. You can see some of them I've actually added some of that graphite on. Probably a platen that I plan on using a lot, although these don't wear because the back of the belt is smooth, and then with this graphite, it just makes it super slick. So yeah, they work really well. I did do a YouTube video if you want to check out what I'm talking about. I believe the video is called Smooth Interior Radiuses. So yeah, anyway, 9401 Makita belt sander. Bam, beautiful find.
Here's another application for the belt sander. Now, besides keeping the belt sander moving, a key point is to let that belt sander cantilever way past. You can see that I'm about halfway past. If I was to let go of that and it wasn't running, it would be about the teeter point, right? Where it would just roll over toward the front. And what that's going to do is going to keep the pressure off of the back roller, which is a typical problem when people start to use a belt sander. They make these trenches back where the back roller is. So that's a really key point. You can see here I've got some solid wood edging. Now everything is nice and flush. Okay, here that darker species is Wenge and the lighter wood is oak on the edge. And I need to get those two nice and flush and also remove any glue residual. The belt sander excels at something like this. Here I'm just scraping a little bit of the glue so I don't gum up the sandpaper on the belt sander. Then I can continue. That wide platen keeps everything easy and stable. And I can keep everything very flat and make everything really flush and smooth at the same time. Many times I can skip finish sanding just by adding a 180 grit to the belt sander. Very effective. Here's that panel just about complete, almost entirely sanded smooth with a belt sander. And here is where one of those panels ended up on these speaker enclosure tables. Fantastic. So here's a good close-up shot of a solid piece of wood sitting slightly proud. Let's get that flush. This is going to start to get a little bit redundant now, but I want to reiterate the importance of letting that belt sander hang out past the edge. You can see I'm just about past halfway with the front nose sticking beyond the panel. That's really important. All right, this shot is going to show just a little bit of glue residual here and there, and that is just about right, so I can be done with the belt sander and move on to an orbital sander or a DA, dual action, right? All right, check this out. I wanted to make a test. Now, this is a quality sander, right? And it has a hard pad. And so with a light, and this probably doesn't show up that great on camera, but with a light behind a quality straight edge, you can see light showing at the edges. This is going to happen with a DA, a dual action sander, or an orbital. This is not going to happen with a quality tuned belt sander. That's the big difference. Let's say you have a narrow board and you don't want cross-grain scratches from the belt sander. Well, what you can do is just hold the belt sander askew at an angle, which incidentally is the fastest that the belt sander will sand. And then you can progress through finer grits until everything's nice and smooth. Have I mentioned that it's very effective? Yeah. Here I'm showing you how that shop sawn veneer is sticking out slightly proud. Belt sander is the most effective way to get that nice and flush, whether it's cross grain or long grain. Low raking light, just to check everything. Yeah. Solid wood parts, yeah, no problem. These are drawer components, right? Fronts and backs, sides. And these probably came right off the planer. And sander with maybe a 180 to smooth everything up. Here they are, all glued in place. Those little dudes are what I call my vise wedges. And so I can gauge the width of that drawer, which is about, I don't know, 2 1/4. And by putting the drawer on one side, since the vise screw is in the way, I can add these vise wedges and prevent that front vise from racking. And then again, belt sander, you bet. And here you can see I used dominoes to reinforce those corners. They're shop-made dominoes made of walnut. I didn't want them contrasting. Just needed the strength and a belt sander to get those nice and flush. A key point or major difference between an orbital and a belt sander is with an orbital you could get little pigtails or swirls. With a belt sander, those scratches are linear. However, I double check with a low raking light. I could never have scratches in my work. Speaking of cross grain scratches, here you can see that at some point I have to produce scratches in one of the components, right? Or two that are opposite each other. No problem. By sanding these with maybe a 120 grit, this is pretty soft. This is aromatic cedar. And then moving up to a 180, I'm going to have very slight, subtle scratches, and those can be removed with an orbital. So yeah, when you're starting out with a belt sander, start out with a really smooth grit, like maybe a 180. All right, so how about small components? Also, no problem. Here's this cross-shaped urn, aromatic cedar, and I've got a little bit of glue on the corners and some areas that aren't quite flush. You simply put the belt sander in place, let it balance. It wants to sand flat. Keep the belt sander moving. You can feel one little area that wasn't quite flush, a little bit of a touch up, and bam, done, just like that. Check it with low raking light. Love it.
So I'm working on a small batch of these bench vices, and you might be wondering what these are. Basically, they're just a series of wedges with magnets inside that I can pick a dimension and put it in this front vise when I'm clamping a component to keep this from racking. Anyway, I'm going to be sanding like 3 of these at a time, and I could do these individually, or I could do 3 at a time. So I just find a clean area of my bench that's nice and flat. These don't even have to be lined up this direction, just on their edges, right? So I can just do that, kind of check it. Bring those here. This is the accuracy of a belt sander. This would be impossible with a random orbit. I'm gonna go ahead and mark this so I can keep track of those pencil lines. Beautiful, smooth, accurate, fast.
More smallish parts. So these are cradles for my domino docks. These fit the DF500, and the little box that they're setting on, it's kind of a vacuum box. You can see there's a hole in it with a hose connected. That just captures all the sawdust. Super effective. I'm getting everything nice and flush. Of course, low raking light. Here's yet another way the belt sander excels, by holding it on edge. Now, this component would have been very challenging to clamp it the way I have it clamped and hold it on edge, so I just left it flat, horizontal, and I can rotate the belt sander on edge. My goal here is to get the substrate flush with this face, which is actually a drawer component. I'll show you in a bit what I'm talking about. It worked exceptionally well. And here I have vertical grain that I need to do the same thing. And the reason I have that top piece clamped the way it is because that top piece needs to be removed. I'm going to add edging to it and then put it back. So they're 2 separate components that will actually get finished at separate times. Boom. How's that for an illusion? So I actually made a pair of these, and this is the other one. I added a piece of tape where the drawer intersects with the carcass. That way I can allow for layers of finish there and then get everything sanded nice and flush. The belt sander excels at this. And I'm going to show you just how accurate you can be. So here's a quality straight edge that I'm going to use. And a light. Boom. That is dead on nuts accurate, right? So I've created this style of hidden drawer in the past, and without adding tape, I found out the hard way that the lacquer would make the drawer front stick out too far. So by adding tape, everything goes in a little bit further, then the finish goes on, and everything ends up nice and flush. Magnets at the end to hold that closed. And this is probably not much of a surprise now, but I wanted this illusion of this panel coming up through the top. You can see end grain up at the top there. Yeah, came out beautiful. So here's a top view of that shot with the tenon appearing to come through. Can't do that with solid wood, but with a veneer, yeah, you can do what you want.
So this is a bit of a unique situation. So I have these components, and these are constructed of Baltic birch plywood, veneered on the outside. I'm trying to get this veneer flush, and I used a flush cut bit to remove the excess, but sometimes it leaves it a little bit proud, especially if the router bit has been sharpened. And this needs to remain dead flat for another piece that goes on. I don't want any discrepancy in that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this pencil, right? And now as I sand this with a belt sander, I can get that nice and flush. I can keep track of this pencil mark and make sure I don't go too much. I'll sand more than half, then I can turn everything around, repeat the process.
One thing you'll notice that it's really beneficial to kind of goose the throttle or the trigger to aid in control. You're not keeping it running full blast. Makes a big difference.
That worked very well. I can still see a little bit of pencil mark and even some of the saw marks on here, so I know I haven't gone too much. I could turn this around, repeat the process. I actually added weights in here just to make sure that everything is nice and flat. That's going to work very well. So yeah, belt sander, super versatile.
Here's a really useful fixture. It's just a belt sander cradle, basically. Keeps the belt sander on edge, and I can sand small parts. Now, I have a large belt sander or edge sander, but this one I have a lot of different grits, and so with this I can go to 180 and then even sand up to 320. So it just makes sanding small parts a breeze. I do have plans for this. Now, this is designed for the particular model of the Makita 9401, but you can apply this to just about anything. Here's one door to a project that I did recently. So this is actually marquetry and inlay both. Marquetry is on the panel or the center part of the door, and inlay is on the style of the door. And I need to get that all flush. Belt sander seemed like the perfect tool, right? And the reason there's inlay on the door style is so that those stems or branches, stems really, can carry from one door to the next. And I'll show the finished piece here at the end of this video. Here we go. This shows the marquetry and the inlay and the finished sideboard done in walnut with wenge. Now, these are some older videos that I pulled off of Instagram, I believe, but this just really shows the versatility of a belt sander. You can see that these are actually chair backs or crest rails, and they're curved, right? And so I'm trying to get that outer band of solid wood flush with the rest of the curved substrate. And so by just sneaking up on it, and with a finer grit, I can do that. And then of course a block sand to get everything nice and flush. So that was the convex side. Now I'm going to do the concave side. So this is that same chair rail, and it's curved with this marquetry motif. I need to get that all nice and flush. So I start out by marking it, and I believe I went around all the colored leaves just so I wouldn't get pencil in some of those areas. And I did an entire video on using these curved belt sander platens. I believe it was called Sanding Inside Curves, and I'll show you how to make these curved platens to fit on the belt sander to achieve something like this. It's a fantastic method. It's one of my all-time favorites. And with that, I was able to get this curved chair rail nice and flush and smooth. All right, there you have it. There's the finished product. And I absolutely hope that this helps somebody out there, and I hope that you dig out your belt sander and teach it some new tricks. Please remember to like and subscribe. That helps me out. And as always, thanks a ton for watching.